Hello, and welcome to the Mesa Arts Center podcast. On this episode, we talk to creative community architect Arianna Jones about the importance of art, poetry, and expression in a world where mental health is often a secondary thought. Thank you for listening and enjoy. Hey.
So fancy.
It's very fancy, isn't it? Are you proud of me?
I am. Live mixing.
Live mixing, yeah. I'm a man of many talents. Live mixing a podcast is one of them. How are you doing, Arianna Jones?
I'm doing good. I'm glad to be here at the Mesa Arts Center.
Yeah, I'm really excited because you have been an integral part in a lot of things that we have done here at the Mesa Arts Center. And so I'm really excited and honored that you are going to be the first guest of season 2 of the Mesa Arts Center podcast.
Yeah, I'm honored. I mean, I didn't know I was first. You know, they say when you go first on the mic, you got to ease the crowd into it. So hopefully people will digest this well.
Yeah, I think it's going to be great. So just a little bit of context as to kind of who you are from my perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You are a poet. You are a marketing guru. Mm-hmm. You currently manage marketing for ASU Gamage, which is an amazing institution. Mm-hmm. And you're a fashionista.
Oh.
Yeah.
I take that one, yes.
You are. I honestly, I will say that I'm not big into like super fashion, but like you're always fresh to death. So I will say that. Yeah.
That's the title I am most proud of, I will say.
Fashionista. I like it. So let's start with the first thing, which is poet, right? So when did you start writing poetry? Officially.
I will say, I think I was like 10, 11 years old. And I have an aunt who wrote poetry. I have an aunt and an uncle, both different sides of the family.
Okay.
And my aunt had been published in this book that used to sit around our house. And my mom would tell me about it. And I'm like, oh, okay. So I would read it and didn't really have any context. And I would write. And I remember writing a poem about some boy.
Of course.
And it wasn't like a real boy. It was like this, like a boy who didn't like me back kind of thing. And I can't remember who it was. I don't think it was about anybody. But my aunt read it. And she started crying.
Wow.
And she was like, this is so powerful and, you know, all this stuff. And in my head, I was like, oh, well, you know, it's just about a boy not loving a girl back, really, you know. And then from there, I was like, oh, okay. So I'm making up stuff and writing it. And the first time I wrote poetry to share, like intentionally to share, we went to this thing in high school called Cardinal Town, which is like the Any Town version, but in high school. And I wrote a poem that was like part of this workshop where you combine basically all your ethnicities. And I was in the mixed race group. And the teacher was like, oh my gosh, you have to share this. You have to enter this in the poetry contest and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay. And then I'm also like, she was the contest judger, one of them. So I won it. So part of me is like, maybe it was a little biased and she just really wanted me to win. But from there, I was like, oh, well, people actually want to, like, you win things for this, you know, and all that. And then fast forward, I didn't actually know people wanted to hear you speak it out loud until I got to college and performed. I think I performed on a stage with you, not with you, but, you know, in the same open mic, the Amasu Welcome Back Black Poetry.
That's right, yeah.
And I had performed and I was like reading from my at the time I had this big giant Samsung tablet, didn't look up. And then people were just like, oh my gosh, that's so good. And, you know, all that. And I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm kind of good at this thing.
Yeah, you are.
Yeah.
You are. I don't remember that. I remember being a part of that event. I don't remember seeing you there.
Yeah.
But I do remember the first time I did see you was when I was hosting the open mic at Gamage.
Oh, yeah.
And I remember wanting to call you Arianna, or what was it? Because how do we mess up your name?
I think it was that. I mean, that's just a different pronunciation.
Yeah.
In my head, it's spelled the same, but I'm also not Mexican, so maybe it's not spelled the same in other people's heads.
But yeah, I do remember that particular part, but I also remember being like, oh, wow, you're a really good poet. And then I eventually gave you the name Arianna Jones Poetry, because you write, I think you write a very heavy load of love poems. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's ironic because your first poem was about a boy who didn't like you back. Yeah.
I don't know if it was about me. It might have just been about me in my head. I don't know. But what I will say is I ventured into not necessarily writing about love in a romantic sense. So it still is a fitting name. I just try to start, framing my poetry more so in like the different parts of love that don't have anything to do with somebody loving you back in a romantic way. It's just like how I'm perceived in the world or how I perceive it from others. So it's been exciting. Every time I write my name on open mic list and you're hosting it, it doesn't matter what I put.
Doesn't.
Ari Love Jones Poetry.
Ari Love Jones Poetry. Well, you will always be that.
I'll accept it though.
So that's an interesting thing that triggered something in my brain. Have you ever read the book by Bell Hooks called All About Love?
So that's a very dense read, in my opinion.
I did not get
through it. I started it. It's very, it's very 80s, 90s. So, I mean, I know it's a great and beloved book, and I plan to read it. It's on my entertainment system. So I look at it all the time and be like, I should probably finish that. I know it's like a staple, and I should. I just haven't yet.
I mean, with all due respect, I read it maybe 10 years ago, and I don't remember a lot from it because it is a dense read, and it is a good book. I recommend anyone reading it. But one of the reasons why I chose to read that book was because I did want to understand a different perspective of love, right? Because a lot of times we grow up, automatically assuming love is romantic.
Right.
But in that book, it says, is love a noun or a verb? And it really goes into kind of like the difference of that. So I'm going to ask you, just on your genius perspective, when you think about love, do you think of it more as a noun or a verb?
I think of it as if I had to choose between those two, it would be a verb, because in my mind, when I think of a noun, it means something that you can hold. It's tangible. It's something that you can potentially own.
Yeah.
And so when I think of a verb, I think of it something that it's moving, it's alive and well, and doesn't belong to anybody. You can love. Everybody can love because everybody can be a part of a verb, right?
Yeah.
So when I think about it like that, I can get really deep into like love being even beyond just the grammatical terms, verb, noun, and all that, but we won't get into that because then we'll just start writing more poetry.
No, we will, because that's what this episode is really, I'm hoping to accomplish, is to talk about, how writing and just art in general is good for mental health. And I think of it, I agree with you. I do understand why we think of love as a noun in terms of like a feeling, or we connect it to a person, right? But when I read that book and it really talked about like love as an action, like love is not necessarily what you feel, it's what you do for other people in the essence of compassion and empathy and things of that nature. And so, I think if we can really frame love as more of a verb, and then it, in terms of like your creative and writing process, now it's evolving to where you're not writing about love as like romantic love, but how does love manifest itself in the world, in other spaces?
And within myself, I think one of the things I've been challenging myself with most recently in the last couple of years is thinking about love in a way that it's like feeling love has nothing to do with the other person, right? They're going to do stuff and they can say, oh, I cleaned up your room for you, and you could not care less about that. Yeah. That's not love to you. So like thinking about what are the things that make me feel loved and identifying that in people that maybe they don't even recognize that that's them loving me. And then recognizing that if they're doing something that they think is love, doesn't mean that they aren't meeting it. It's just like they're loving in a different way, and just allowing both to coexist is how I've been challenging myself with mostly, is because it's, it's, you hear all the things and stipulations online and everything out there in the world. And it's like, well, if they're not bringing you flowers every day, then he doesn't really love you, or they don't really care about you. And, I think it's so much bigger and it's so much more dynamic than just one thing to identify what somebody feels about you.
Yeah. One of my favorite kind of juxtapositions about love and flowers is, right? So that's kind of I even have it in one of the poems that I wrote about my grandfather, how he would bring home fresh flowers on Thursdays just because it was Thursdays. And, for however long in history, bringing someone you care for or love flowers has always been like a gesture of love.
Yeah.
But then I heard this thing is that, like when you pick a flower from the garden, it is essentially going to at that point die. Right. Right. And love is not about giving somebody something that's going to die. It's essentially not possessing it, but nurturing it and let it do what it's going to do in the world, outside of you owning it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy. So this month, September, is National Suicide Prevention Month. I didn't know that. Did you know that?
I usually pay attention to it.
Yeah.
I have a purple and blue little thing I picked up a while ago, like years and years ago. It's hanging in my rearview mirror.
Yeah.
Like that's their awareness colors.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I've known about it for a couple of years now, but I didn't know. And it wasn't until someone had asked me to read this poem that I wrote that is about suicide at a National Suicide Prevention Month event, right? Yeah. So, and for me, it was really interesting because the poem that I read and wrote was about specifically how I was struggling with mental health. And I was at the same time going into schools teaching, which is what you do as well as a teaching artist, and teaching young people how to help their mental health by writing about it, and then going home and not doing that same thing. Right. Like
do as I say, not as I do.
Exactly, right. But finding my way back to writing as a tool of therapy.
Right.
And in full transparency, and I think this is important, we were supposed to record this podcast a week ago, and it didn't happen because I was in not a good mental space.
Right.
And we still talked, which is, I want to say thank you because that conversation helped me. But how has writing helped you manage your mental health?
It's in that same notion of like going, you want to tell the world, tell people you care about, process your emotions, do what you have to do, right? But then writing sometimes feels like it's work, because managing your mental health is work. You have to,
it is,
so sometimes it doesn't always, it's not my go-to, if I'm being completely honest. If I'm having a day where I'm struggling, it's definitely not a go-to for me to, get the feelings out. I know some people are like, oh, I'm feeling all these things, I just need to write it down. And for me, I think I'm such an intellectualizer that it actually does the opposite of what I've been trying to do, is which is feel my feelings and managing my health in a way, or mental health in a way that it's like actually sitting with the discomfort and not doing anything about it.
Yeah.
And just letting my body recognize, whatever I'm feeling, whether it's, anxiety or sadness or depression, and just like paying attention, because that's what those feelings want.
Yeah.
They want you to pay attention to them, right? And so when it comes to writing in that sense of trying to manage my mental health, it's, after the fact, maybe it's like a week. It could be something I just write a note about, like, something to do with anxiety, and then I think of a title and I write it down somewhere, and then I probably won't come back to it. And I don't even know. Sometimes I won't come back to it. And sometimes it's been challenging too, because I do want to write the deep, I remember what I was feeling when I was writing that and all that. But then that kind of feeds into my ego. Well, if I have to be sad to write a really good poem, and
hold on, but we gotta pause for a second, because if that isn't the truth
right?
about poetry,
Yeah.
it's like I have to be sad to write a really good poem,
or I have to be devastated,
Yeah.
And I also think that those feelings do produce great, powerful work. But to answer the question, I write in a journal, maybe I try to do it at least once a week, even if it's nothing, or once every other week. I use my phone a lot. And
so you do have a process of at least journaling when it comes to.
Yes, I won't say I'm consistent, but yes.
Okay. Yeah.
It's definitely something where I'm, trying also not to be, you want to be, you can't call yourself a writer if you don't write, those types of,
right.
Those narratives that I'm like, okay, well, if I'm going to use it for a tool, I have to let those types of, I'm not writing right now to be a writer. I'm trying to separate the two in my head of I'm doing this, and however it comes out is however it comes out. It really doesn't matter to me, but trying to turn that off after half my life of writing. I've only written for a very specific purpose. It used to be to perform. Then I stopped performing. Then it used to be, I want to be able to publish a book someday that people are going to read, and people don't want to read stuff that is not deep. At least, maybe they do. I don't know. I know there's poets out there that write very simple things.
Yeah, there's an audience for there's an audience for everything.
Yeah. So I have a system in place sometimes, and then sometimes I'm just sitting on the couch watching Netflix.
Yeah. Well, it is an evolution, right? I think what I learned, because it's interesting. I didn't think about it until you just said it. Is we write as a profession, right? And so, right. I say that after a lot of things. I always say right after something that I know is true.
Right, yeah.
Right? We write as a profession, not just creatively, but also you're a marketer, right? And so I write grants. So writing isn't all, it is a chore sometimes. And when you're not in the best mental space, it is important to feel those feelings and kind of step away from it. But to have a space to put it once you've processed through it, I think is really important.
I think so too. And another thing is, I think I don't have to just write. I'm a creative person, right? So another thing that I'll do is I'll just try new things, I started drawing my feelings.
I love that.
And it has nothing, it's in the same journal that I write in, so then eventually my plan is to flip back through them and then write about how I see this feeling, even if it's a very terrible doodle or scribbles or what have you, just finding a way to be creative and get it out, or move my body, whether it could be a dance class. Dance is art, Working out could be art depending on the audience, but there is bodybuilding competition.
Yeah,
I don't know
true.
if they consider that art, but and then I do photography sometimes. I think I know what I'm doing, just trying to work those muscles.
Yeah, fashion is art.
That is true. I forget about that.
When you get up and think about, you look very
chic.
Cool, chic, very demure. Just kidding. But you have to think about what is gonna go well.
And I dress actually most times, and not one of the struggles with trying to create content, right? Because I have a Instagram account that I made specifically for, the outfits that I make with my secondhand clothing that I buy. And I usually struggle because it's all dependent on how I feel.
Yeah.
I'm not, I also will throw in something oh, I think this looks good. Even though I feel like crap, I'm going to wear it. And then I'm just not going to take a picture in it because how you remember those pictures of I was not feeling well in that picture. But I want to wear the outfit again. So then I want to feel good.
You don't want to taint it?
I don't want to taint it. Yeah.
No, and I think what what I would say, and this is specifically to the working out is art, depending on if, you know what the audience,
Yeah.
but it's less about art and it's more about expression,
Right.
because art is a form of expression. You're expressing yourself, and I think that there are many ways, and I think for me, as a creative person, as an artist who earns a living from being creative, I do need other forms of expression
Right.
that aren't connected to that, so that I can detach. Because sometimes I'm not well mentally because my job as an artist is asking too much of me, right? So it's like, I don't want to write about how I'm feeling. I want to go lift heavy weights.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. It's, all the duality that we hold is like, oh, I know I'm creative. I did that today. I'm going to go do something that's completely different,
But I think where I will spin this conversation to is just the importance of actually being aware of mental health and taking care of it in some way, shape, or form, which is work, right? You do have, which is hard work, because when you don't feel well, it's hard to want to do anything.
Yeah.
But I know that I grew up in a generation where my mother, the mentors that I had growing up, nobody talked about mental health in my childhood.
Right. Yeah.
And so I think we are kind of leaning into the first generation of like, hey, this is an essential part of what it is to be human. And sometimes you're not going to feel good. So how do you recognize that and take care of it so you can be the best version of yourself as possible?
Yeah.
So
I agree. And, a lot of unlearning of the, I know in my house, my mom was very overly expressive,
okay.
which I don't mean that in a bad way. She just expressed her feelings very loudly. And
that's a very polite way to say that.
And I think the thing is coping. Like we learned our coping skills from our parents, right? And so unlearning the coping skills that I don't necessarily want to, project into my spaces, and trying to teach myself new ones has been what I feel like is, I could say, quite a few people in our or I don't know if you're a millennial, but
I'm not. I'm Gen X.
You're a baby Xer.
I'm a baby Xer. I love that, because it's baby boomers and Gen X. I'm very much a baby Xer.
But the younger generations are really, I feel like, trying to, okay, we can recognize in the older generations what their mental health, instead we knew what they were going through, but and how they coped with it, but we just didn't have names for it. Now we have names, and now there's the therapist jargon that's thrown everywhere, and it's so accessible, so we can hopefully use those as tools to pick whatever course we want to go.
I do think there is something really important about understanding the value of adversity. Not feeling well is not okay for a long sustained period of time, but being uncomfortable and going through adversity is also what makes us more resilient humans, right? So I do think that we can't overcorrect the situation, right? And that's something I'm very aware of with my kids, is not overcorrecting mental health. It's like, yes, let's talk about it. Let's express ourselves. Let's take a mental health day if we need to. But we're doing it to get better, because you can't just use that as a crutch, because being human is hard.
Yeah, you have to heal the symptom.
Yeah.
Not the disease. Because like you could call bipolar a disease, right? It is technically a disease. And some people you'll never get, like, those will never go away. Sometimes people will live with bipolar their whole lives, and that's just what it is. But the symptoms of it being manic and not getting out of bed and just having these deep, dark seasons of depression, those are all symptoms. So I think if we think about ourselves or people out there, or your kids, it's like they could be having a long-term mental health issue. And the idea is, well, taking a mental health day is not going to heal
disease.
this disease. But taking it could heal the season of, your symptom or things like that. And I'm not a professional by any means. I just feel like, if we treated all these things that, have such stipulations and negative ideas around them, and we think about it like, oh, okay, well, that's just part of something and trying to tell me something. I'm trying to grow from this, or I need to cope with this, or this is like a cut. When if you cut yourself, you don't yell at the wounds like, why aren't you getting better? Like, you don't?
I do it all the time.
You put stuff on, the ointment, the Band-Aid, things like that. So we have to treat our mental health the same way. What are the Band-Aids for you? What is the ointment? What does your downtime look like, and spending downtime in a healthy way. Sometimes I know that sitting on the couch watching Netflix is my way of avoiding a feeling.
Yeah.
And sometimes I'm like, you know what, I just had a really long week. I'm going to do it. And I could also be avoiding a feeling, but I'm doing it anyways. Just understanding that sometimes the coping mechanisms that we have are not actually doing anything for us, but it's keeping us there. But also knowing that sometimes they fit the bill and it's okay.
No, it is complex and it's very nuanced, and I think it's important to talk about. All right. So one of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about was actually the creative leadership program that you were a part of here at the Mesa Arts Center called The Collective.
Yeah.
You were a part of the
OGs.
First cohort of individuals. And so just a little bit of context, at the Mesa Arts Center, we created a creative leadership program. What we really wanted to do was essentially look at creativity as a vehicle for leadership and kind of change and shake up the way that leadership development was done. And like I said, you were one of the first cohorts to go through that. So that was like, what, 6-7 years ago now? I feel 2018.
I feel like, yeah,
it was a while ago. So it's been long enough that you're going to have to pull into your memory. But
I know.
like, what was that experience like for you?
Well, I think that I was in a very unique position because I feel like I was not just a creative, which I know not everybody in there was.
Yeah.
But I feel like sometimes when you're just a creative or you're just a business person, it's kind of hard to see where they intersect and are both strengths for one another, you know? And as a creative, and I was also doing, what was I doing at that time? Marketing. Well, I was a baby in my career then.
You were.
I had just started doing marketing for a nonprofit.
Which is why I think it's an interesting, conversation, because you really were kind of the perfect demographic of like, you weren't a young person who was just starting in like school. You had your bachelor's, but you were still figuring out who you were. And I would like to think that all of your success was because of the collective.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 1,000%. Without the collective, I would not be where I'm. I would not have met
welcome.
Obama.
You're welcome.
Oh wait, that was something else.
That was something different.
But so I would say that I really enjoyed how I could see where my creativity, like I'm definitely one of those people that can brainstorm probably nonstop, and I feel like that's probably my creative muscle, because I also write very similarly. It's like, oh, I'm just gonna
make a mess,
just keep going, until like I can't write anymore. And then also I think that there are some parts of it where I would never had thought about, like one thing that I've taken a couple times after that is the feedback, response.
Critical response theory.
Yes.
CRT.
Yes. So I've taken
shout
that.
Shout out to Liz Lerman.
Right. Yes. Shout out to her. She was a resident artist at ASU Gamage.
Yep.
And she's a professor, all those, you can Google her for those accolades.
Yeah.
But she's amazing.
Liz. She's amazing. Yeah.
And so that was the first time taking that training and thinking about feedback in a way that wasn't necessarily like, because, that was created for dancers.
Yes.
And, taking that training and then thinking about how it applies to something professional like a business, even now I think about feedback and asking for permission to give feedback, which is not something normal. I'm like, oh, well, you want to hear what I have to say? I'll tell you.
Yeah.
Unsolicited.
I got a lot of opinions.
Right. And I can't remember the other. I just, I think it was great to, and be around people that I found. A lot of my friends aren't artists.
Yeah.
Shout out to Taisha. She's a painter. She's doing some amazing stuff now with domestic violence and using her art to spread messages that empower women or survivors or victims of domestic violence. And so, I know that we were all successful now because of the collective. We could say that. But, seeing back then, I only knew her as a painter.
Yeah.
And, so I did not, necessarily come out of the collective with the whole project and like something that's tangible that I can say I did. But I felt like I came away with it with a lot of tools that, just helped me think differently when it comes to how creativity is necessary to have a successful business.
Yeah, it really is. Mm-hmm. And that was one of the most important parts of the collective is so for context purposes, the collective essentially took the participants on this journey with bi-weekly workshops that were centered around like creativity, leadership, critical response. But then also there was a final project component where we wanted the participants to create some type of a creative community-based project that was specific to them. And some people did that and ran with it. Some people, created something just for the collective. But the to me, the most important part of the collective was, no pun intended, the collective kind of energy or synergy of all these people coming from different walks of life and different experiences to lean on each other, because community is actually one of the most important tools that we have as humans to thrive.
Right.
We're not meant to just live in isolation. Sorry to all of the the introverts and the hermits, right? I'm one of them, but we're not meant to live in isolation.
Right.
And so, I agree. And I loved watching you, and I know your success is, you were going to be successful one way or the other. That was one of the reasons why I wanted to recruit you for the collective, because although you were young and aspirational, like I knew that there was something inside of you that you were going to be successful no matter what, right?
So I was trying to remember how old I think I was 26 years ago. 6 years ago, I would have been 26. Yeah.
So,
wow.
Yeah. So,
I appreciate, it's definitely, and I also seeing, shout out to Jen, you both work together and creating something that was also like nuanced and, so it was something that hasn't been done. And then I think it's we need people like y'all who think of things and pull them out their brain and then put them out into the world and sees what happens, because that's when magic happens.
That is, yeah. And I will, I do realize this is the Mesa Arts Center podcast.
Right.
And I do work for the Mesa Arts Center, so this is going to come off totally biased, but truly, like, that is the reason why I am committed to the Arts Center, is because they allow us to think creatively and take risks with ideas like a creative leadership program. Like, so I do want to say shout out to, the leadership here and, the people that have helped us, support these radical ideas that we have.
Right. It's cool. And, like, who would have thought I was coming here today to be on the Mesa Arts Center's podcast? Like, if I tell my friends that, they're going to be like, what? They have a podcast? I'm like, well, now you know, So it's really cool. And every time I, tell people about the stuff that I've done with the Mesa Arts Center, it's always like, wow.
Yeah.
They're blown away. So
yeah. It is. It's a great institution, but it's because it's just, in essence, it's supportive of creative people. And sometimes those relationships don't necessarily always flourish, because one of the things that I was talking about the other day, ironically, I was teaching a leadership workshop for one of the communities in Mesa, Eastmark. And that was a part of the legacy of the collective, right? We used to go off and do these kind of one-off workshops. But anyways, I was saying something about the Art Center, and I was like, yeah, and there was a little bit of controversy in regards to that. I was like, but you can't work in arts and culture without some controversy, because it is we are taking risks. We are trying to figure out how creativity, how culture all collide in this space that is going to be messy at times.
Yeah.
And as humans, sometimes when there's a mess, we can get too attached to our personal feelings about it, and it creates controversy. Right.
Yeah. And, you know, art is supposed to be thought-provoking.
It is.
However it makes you feel is just like secondary, but it's supposed to be thought-provoking, right? Like, I'm going to inspire you to think differently in some way, or you're going to walk away really upset because you thought something and then it shattered what you thought, or you're so happy because you're like, oh my gosh, I agree with this. I'm a genius. You know, like all those things, how you feel about it is like the residual. You know what I mean? And you know, since I work at ASU Gamage, we bring, you know, lots of different types of shows. And we have a show coming up that is like, oh my gosh, it's going to require so much education. And, you know, there's some like resistance there. And it's called Hang Time. And it's from a person that almost won. She was a nominee for an award, and I'm butchering it. But either way, a Black woman wrote a piece about these three men who are essentially on a platform about to be lynched. And they're telling their stories, and they're talking, and it's supposed to be like this very conversational thing, and they're joking around and they're just talking about themselves, but the idea is you're watching them about to, you know, meet their destiny, and
in a very violent way.
And you know, personally, at first, being a Black woman, I was like, I don't know if I want to bring this to ASU Gamage. Not that I have a choice in it. I wish I did have that much power, but I don't. But you know, the more I've thought about it, I'm like, well, this person, you know, definitely found that it was a necessary story. And I think that all stories, you know, if small, big, you know, circumstantial, I feel like if they're, you know, they're meant to be told, you know, and so I'll be interested to seeing how it plays out and because I'll go and watch it because, you know, it's something that I'm like, oh, okay, well, it's making me question it, but that's what arts groups do, right? That's why our executive director, you know, and our programmatic director decided to bring it. You take chances, you take risk on those kind of things, and you know. Anyways, that's my 2 cents.
No, it is. It's important. I think it's interesting. I love when I find circular moments in conversations where it's like you draw back to something. But, you know, we were talking about mental health at the beginning of this conversation and how important it is to not overcorrect the process of mental health, where you are, you know, putting people in a society or a space where they aren't equipped to handle uncomfortable situations or adversity, right? And art absolutely pushes that boundary. Right. But I love what you said about the educational component about that, because that is where the opportunity for the controversy to be turned into a platform for growth and evolution. We can't just, I will say this is my personal opinion. This is not the reflection of any institution that I'm a part of, but personally, I don't like art just for art's sake. I don't, because especially art that is provoking an emotion and talking about things that are nuanced and complex. If you're going to have a show like Hang Time, or you're going to have art that is talking about and highlighting a very dangerous or specific thing in our culture, you have to have the educational components with it so that we can grow from it. Yeah. You know, and if you're not willing to do that part,
then you're just there to shock and awe.
And there's no growth in that. Yeah. You know, that's just not cool, because I as a human only am interested in learning how we can be better humans with other demographics and cultures and things of that nature, because I'm multicultural. My family is multicultural. Like, I have to learn other things
Yeah.
for my family to survive. And so it's like, how do we come together as humans and learn and grow? And yeah, anyways, here's my tiny violin.
No, but I'll also say that, that is the whole purpose of sometimes our writing,
100%.
Like, when I go to an open mic and I see or hear somebody talking about a bunch of, pop culture, like just one-liners, all there to, just get a reaction out of the crowd. There is a purpose. There is a place for those writers, people love it, but like for me, I just need some more depth. I need it to be a little bit deeper than, a line about, I don't know, Kim Kardashian or something like that. It has to be, okay, you can think that, or that can be true, but like, tell me what brought you there. Yeah. Tell me how you feel. Yeah. You know what I mean? And don't just state a bunch of things to me. And so like, as I write and, I try to get deeper, like, okay, well, I go outside today and the sun was shining. Okay, great. But like, why did I want to write this? Why am I writing about the sun shining? Just questioning myself. So when I see art or, go to shows or something like that, and it doesn't do that, I'm like, dang, this was a missed opportunity here.
Yeah, for sure.
To make somebody feel, to make somebody be seen, to make somebody be, feel heard. I feel like that's the whole purpose, right? And so, shows, art, sculpture, all those kinds of things. I would hope that we're creating things in this world, and there are lots of great artists out there who do so many different mediums. I didn't even say them all, but the idea is that they're fulfilling something. Yeah. One of those buckets, right? Like we want to not feel like we're alone in this world. So that is so that somebody else can see it and be like, recognize themselves, even if it's not even the same thing. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I agree. It's all about building culture. And I being a 45-year-old poet is an interesting space, right? Because when I started in poetry, I was much younger. I didn't have as much life experience. Right. I also did understand and learned really quickly the culture of spoken word, which is, to your point, you want to, you only have 5 minutes at best. And 5 minutes is a long time to be on a mic, right? And so you're like, you want to get as much response from the audience as possible. For me, I'll speak for myself. Right. I wanted people to think I was cool. Yeah. I wanted people to be like, yeah, I like that guy. And I learned really quickly to cater to my audience, which generally in an art environment, the audience is going to be a little more progressive, right? A little more on the, down for the social justice, which I'm all about. But I also understand I can't solve, right, the police brutality in a 3-minute poem. Right. Yeah. And I have two choices. I can just write a poem that highlights all the wrong, get the snaps, get the ooh-ahs, and then leave and feel good about myself. But once that dopamine goes away, my brain is like, hey, but you didn't talk about the complexities of this. And then you have to like be courageous enough to say, I'm going to try to write a poem that talks about the other side, the other perspective. And you're not going to get the snaps. Yeah. You're not going to get the ooh-ahs because they're like, yo, wait a minute. Right. Like, we don't like this.
Yeah, it's... And, I will say that's the one thing, that's the line for me that I draw between poetry and spoken word. Yeah. And it's the performance aspect. Yes. It's like spoken word. Yes, I'm here to fulfill the space, give a good show. Yeah. Whether it's good writing or bad. There's no bad writing, just kidding. But, and poems, they're meant to like read. They could be spoken, they could be sang, they put them in lyrics, all these things. And so the performance piece and like the getting the snaps and all that is what determines the difference in spoken word and poetry for me. Yeah. And, I think that I've taken pieces that I'm like, oh, this is probably, it's going to live on a page and that's probably about it. And I'm like, you know what, I'm going to perform it. Yeah. And maybe people have to read it because it is too deep, and they don't understand it when I say it out loud. And I'm like, okay, well, I didn't come up here for anybody else today. I came up for me.
Yeah, yeah. I just had an epiphany. So this is like art and education, right? And in a perfect world, art is a vehicle for education to help us evolve and grow, right? And it's like having a really good cake, right? And it's like the art is the icing on the cake, right? The education is the cake, right? You can't just eat the icing. You could, but it'll make you feel good for a couple minutes, and then once the sugar high starts to like go down, you feel terrible. So yeah, you have to have the all components if you are interested in creating social transformation or social change. Right. Is you can't just highlight the problems without thinking critically about the solutions and then creating. A poem is not going to change the world, but a curriculum that uses a poem to help educate can impact a community in a very substantial way.
Yeah, I would say so. And hopefully the cake tastes good. I'm just kidding.
No, I agree with you. It's got to be good cake. All right, so we're coming to the end of the podcast. This is the place where I like to put our guest on kind of like a speed dating type of mentality, right? So I'm just gonna throw some questions at you, and I want you to answer them as quickly as possible.
All
right. And you do not know what these questions are, so this is what makes it fun. What would you tell the 10-year-old version of Arianna Love Jones poetry right now?
I would tell her that we are going to be okay even if we failed.
Nice, beautiful. What is your favorite song that you are listening to right now?
Oh, dang, that one's hard. What was I just listening to?
I know, right? That's a tough one because it's like your favorite song right now.
I know. Well, actually, I'll be honest. There's a local artist called Jay Smith, and I'm listening to MMMP. Okay. I can't say the title of the song has cuss words in it, so I won't say that. But
all right. But Jay Smith, local artist. All right, cool. What is the one book that you would give to somebody who you wanted to succeed?
Oh, I thought you were gonna say something else because I was like, I had that one.
That's how you know these questions are completely.
Change your paradigm, change your life.
Change your paradigm, change your life. Okay, that I'd never heard of that. So, do you want me to succeed?
Yeah.
All right, cool. Then I need that book.
I will tell you that. I gotta look at my Libby app.
Yeah. All right. Favorite ice cream?
Oh, chocolate mint.
Mint chocolate chip? Oh my God.
Or cookie dough.
I knew we were kindred spirits.
Hey.
Mint chocolate chip is my favorite ice cream. And I meet a lot of people who are like adamantly disgusted by
like, why you want to eat toothpaste? Mind your business.
Mind your business. It doesn't taste like toothpaste. That's crazy.
And why are you eating toothpaste? Why do you know? No, I'm just kidding.
Why do you know what toothpaste tastes like? What is wrong with you? Oh man. Ari, I really, really, really want to say thank you.
Of course.
Not just for the podcast, but also for all that you're doing in the Valley, right? Because I do think that you are someone who, to the point of when I kind of first met you, you were young, you were aspirational. I knew there was something that was cool about you, and I was right. You're doing really cool things, and you're doing a lot of work with youth. You're helping the programs that we have here at the Mesa Arts Center. But I absolutely want to say thank you for talking to me last week.
Of course.
Because, like I mentioned, this podcast was supposed to be recorded last week, and I just wasn't in a good space. And we talked, and that was really valuable to me. So thank you,
of course,
for that. So, all right, cool. Well, that is the first episode of season 2.
I'm honored, and I will say, since this is September and it's Mental Health Awareness Month, I will say that I told Tomas that he should tell the story about how he was having a day. And, because people need to know that you're not just a robot.
Yeah.
You have all these feelings that you don't always share. And, you know, so it's important. So if you're out there and you're listening and you're, you know, wearing a mask every day, all day, and you should tell people. Yeah. So it's important. They need to know because they'll take care of you if you trust them.
That's a mic drop moment if I ever heard one. So thank you very much. Thank you for listening. And until we meet again, have a great day.